Now coming to the second important literary change that happened during this period, and that is the transitional poetry. This transitional poetry later on gave way to the romantic poetry. But who were these transitional poets who started writing a very different kind of poetry? The poetry being composed or written during the Augustan age was of classical influence and focused more on reason and intellect rather than emotions and feelings. Augustan poets followed a very strict rhyme structure and used mostly heroic verse. Their poetry was even didactic in nature, but there was emerging a new kind of poetry between the late 18th century to the beginning of 19th century. This poetry is usually called as the transitional poetry, as it was a kind of transition, a change from the previous age, that is the Augustan age, into the Romantic era. So this period between the two ages is usually called as the transitional period or the pre-Romantic period. The poems being composed during this phase were a shift from the classical to romantic values, where emphasis is given to emotions and imagination rather than intellect or reason. There was seen an increase in the personal experiences of the common man and his life instead of focusing on royalty or nobility. Now the key poets of this phase are: the first one is John Dyer, second William Shenstone, third Edward Young, fourth James Thomson, fifth is Thomas Gray, sixth is William Collins, seventh is Thomas Chatterton, eighth William Blake, ninth Robert Burns, 10th George Crabbe, and the last one is William Cowper. Out of all these, the most popular is considered to be Edward Young, who is known for his poems like The Last Day and The Complaint, or its other title is Night Thoughts. He asserted that the new poets should abandon the old models of writing style of poetry and rely on their own inspiration. The second important author in this phase was James Thomson, who is best remembered for his poems like The Seasons, which is a series of 4 poems: winter, summer, spring and autumn, which is centered on nature, and his other poems, The Castle of Indolence, which is written in 2 cantos. Cantos are basically called 2 sections in which the poem is divided. So Castle of Indolence is divided into 2 cantos. The third important poet is Thomas Gray, who is well known for his famous poem, An Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. The theme or main message of the poem is that the lives of both the rich and the poor lead to same place, that is the grave. His other poems are The Progress of Poesy, The Bard, The Fatal Sisters, The Descent of Odin. The fourth poet in this category, who is also counted among the transitional poets, is William Blake, who is popular for writing poems like Poetical Sketches, Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, etc. The fifth poet of importance is Robert Burns, who was a Scottish poet famous for writing poems like Tam O'Shanter, a long epic narrative poem about drinking classes in an old Scottish town. He called himself a plowman poet because he was raised in a farming family who were very simple people. The last and the sixth poet of importance in the category of the transitional poet is William Cowper, who is known for his poems like Table Talk, The Task and The Castaway. Besides these poets, 2 more poets are popular in the category of transitional poets, and they are George Crabbe, who is known to have written poems like The Village, which became very popular. Then we have Oliver Goldsmith, who also has a very famous poem to his credit, which is The Deserted Village, published in 1770, which talks about the rural way of life that is being destroyed by the influence of urbanization in England. Most of these poets were popularly began to be known as the Graveyard School of Poetry or the Churchyard School of Poetry. The Graveyard School of Poetry was a group of poets that emerged in the 1740s and flourished until the 1770s. The main characteristics or the main features of this graveyard school of poetry were, first is that they used themes of melancholy and mortality in their poems. Second was that their focus was on death, decay and the afterlife. Third is that they used symbols, imagery and personification which represented afterlife and death. Their poems are often written in elegy style because they used to mourn the death of someone very close or dear to them. So whenever a question comes to you from the graveyard school of poetry, remember the names of these poets, but it should be remembered that Oliver Goldsmith is not counted among the graveyard school of poets because he never wrote any poetry which had the theme of death. So except Oliver Goldsmith, the other poets can be counted under the category of graveyard school of poetry. The graveyard school of poetry had later on influenced the romantic poets, and they were also influenced by the Gothic literature and the horror fiction because they also depicted death in a certain way. This period was the period when the influence of French Revolution was being seen in the entire Europe. It was the kind of period when people were talking about liberty, equality and fraternity, and less importance was being given to monarchy and other powerful forces, and more importance was being given to man and the universe and his centrality to the universe and his importance to the universe. So that was all about the transitional period or the romantic revival. The next period which came after the romantic revival or which came because of the romantic revival is the romantic age itself. In the next video, I will talk to you about the romantic age and the literature popular during the romantic age.